It's a long story, but one you've never heard before. This story is about a place that dwells on the mountain, a place where bad things happen. And you may think you know about the bad things, you may decide you have it all figured out, but you don't, because the truth is worse than monsters or men. These are the opening lines to Borrasca, a story about urban legend, small town conspiracy, and the sickening lengths mankind is capable of going. Hello everyone, and welcome back. A while back I made a video talking about old creepypastas, and while I covered a lot of ground in that video, there were certainly some stories I wasn't able to get to for one reason or another. For the most part, some of the more standout stories that I didn't cover in that video were because I felt it would do a major disservice to talk about them crammed in with all the others. I wouldn't be able to give them the attention or the respect that I feel that they deserved. And perhaps there is no better story that exemplifies this than that of Borrasca. Borrasca is a story by C.K. Walker, a story that I've been in love with since I first read it. So much so that I actually bought a whole C.K. Walker book collection just because Borrasca's the last story in it. And you can find this on Amazon. I think that's where I got it at least. I'll leave a link in the description. And I figure with it being October, why not talk about my favorite horror short story? Now, before we begin, I want to share a few things. One, there will not be much media to see in this video. I am simply telling a story to a camera. Why am I doing this? I don't know. It sounded like fun. So whereas there won't be much to see except me babbling on about this story, this would be a good video to have on while you clean your room, do homework, whatever you need to get done. There won't be much to see, so this could be a good video to have in the background of things. And two, this story does take some very dark turns, specifically near the end. It deals with a lot of mature themes and events, and because of that, viewer discretion is advised. But without further ado, let's dive in to Borrasca. Following the opening lines, we are introduced to our protagonist, a boy named Sam Walker. He and his family, including his father, his mother, and his older sister Whitney, are getting ready to move to a small town out in the Ozarks, a town called Drisking, located in Missouri. This move wasn't one the family was exactly excited about. Whitney even threw a temper tantrum as she didn't want to leave her friends, and notably her new boyfriend, behind. It was so bad that when the news was told at family dinner that night, Whitney threw a bowl at her father, screaming that it was his fault. And she was right, too. Sam's father was a police officer who had apparently done something wrong, and while Sam didn't know what it was, he had heard whispers that his father had in fact done something wrong. And to save face, the sheriff's department had decided to move him and his family to Drisking. Sam, though, being a young child, was quick to turn his attitude of apprehension to that of excitement. He began looking at the move like an adventure, a new house, new school, and more importantly, new friends. But as the move-in date became closer and closer, Whitney grew more and more depressed, refusing to leave her room or get off the phone with her friends and boyfriend. She even threatened to run away if they don't cancel the move. However, a month later, she was sitting in the backseat of the car next to Sam as they pulled into the driveway of their new house in Drisking, Missouri. Having moved in over summer break, the Walker children were able to get acclimated to their new environment pretty quickly, at least before the school year started. See, Drisking was built in a valley between the mountains and forests. Having moved from St. Louis, the Walkers were a little surprised by how small the town was, but on the flip side, they were also impressed by how nice it was. There seemed to be no bad areas in the entire town. The whole town looked like a picture that you'd find on a postcard. And, luckily for young Sam, it didn't take him long to make a new friend either. About a week after the Walkers moved in, their next-door neighbors decided to come introduce themselves. These were Mr. and Mrs. Landy and their 10-year-old son, Kyle. Kyle was a rather lanky boy with fiery red hair. And while the parents of the two boys sat in the kitchen drinking mimosas, the two boys quickly bonded over a love of PlayStation 2 games. And they instantly hit it off, becoming the best of friends. They spent the cool summer mornings playing outside, exploring Drisking and the wildlife, and they spent the hot afternoons inside playing PlayStation. It wasn't long before Kyle introduced Sam to the only other kid in their neighborhood that was their age, a young girl named Kimber. Kimber is described as being a skinny and rather quiet girl, with red hair just as Kyle. However, where Kyle's red hair matched his fiery, energetic personality, Kimber was far more shy. Regardless, Kimber was friendly and always down for anything, and she quickly joined the group as the three became the best of friends. They were inseparable, and with Kimber a part of their group, their summer truly began. Kyle and Kimber spent the majority of the summer showing Sam all the best lakes, hiking trails, and areas to hang out for kids to have fun. Sam truly felt at home by the time the school year started in September. On the last Saturday before the school year started, though, Kyle and Kimber said that they had a surprise for Sam, a super cool treehouse that he had not yet seen. This treehouse was called the Triple Tree. Now, Sam was hesitant to believe the two at first. He thought if there was some super cool, super big treehouse, they certainly would have shown it to him already. After all, they'd shown him everywhere else this summer. Why would they wait so long before showing him this treehouse, especially if it was as cool as they said? But the two stood firm in their stance that not only was the Triple Tree real, but that there was also a ritual that first-time goers had to complete before they could get in. And if this ritual was not completed before the person entered the treehouse, they would disappear and die. Sam was still hesitant though, thinking that they were pulling his leg, but they insisted that if he didn't believe them, then they should just take him there now. All they needed to do before they left was get a knife for the ritual. Rightfully, Sam gets a little nervous here, thinking that this is some sort of blood sacrifice. However, Kyle and Kimber quickly reassured their friend that the knife wasn't for a blood ceremony of some sort, but instead that all he would have to do is carve his name into the base of the tree, say a few words, and then he would get access to the treehouse. The trio headed off to Kyle's house to get a knife, where they ran into Kyle's mom, Mrs. Landy. She asked if they could take Kyle's 6-year-old brother Parker to go along with them, as she had had a long day and simply wanted some time away from the kids. Sam tells us that while Parker was Kyle's little brother, he was completely different from Kyle. Kyle was an excitable boy who was full of all this energy, whereas Parker was far more shy and reserved and quiet. The two even looked different, with Kyle having that fiery red hair, whereas Parker had dark brown hair. Kyle begged for his mother not to make him take Parker, but ultimately the decision was made, and Parker joined the trio on their way to the Triple Tree. They rode their bikes a ways until they came across a trail that said West Rim Prescott Ore Trail. Sam noted that he had seen the name Prescott all over town. He asked about its significance, wondering if the Prescotts had perhaps founded Drisking, or perhaps if the mountain Drisking was built around was Prescott Mountain. Kimber laughed at Sam and informed him that the name Prescott does not come from a mountain or the founder, but instead from a family that lives in Drisking called, well, the Prescotts. A man named Jimmy Prescott owned more than half of the town's businesses, hence why Sam had seen the name everywhere. Parker interrupted their conversation by saying that he wanted to go home. He and Kyle argued for a little bit before Kimber told Kyle he needs to be nice to his little brother and offered to hold the young boy's hand if he was scared. This seemed to calm Parker down a bit, and the four of them continued into the woods to find the Triple Tree. "What do you think?" Kyle asked excitedly. I studied the tree as I caught my breath. "It's pretty awesome." I smiled. And it was. They hadn't lied to me. The treehouse was the biggest one I'd ever seen. It had multiple rooms and there were actual curtains in the windows. A sign above the door said Ambercott Fort, and a rope ladder hung below the threshold, missing several planks. Parker, seemingly rejuvenated with energy at the sight of the treehouse before him, yells that he wants to be the first one up, and begins to take off after it, but Kimber grabs him and pulls him back, reminding him that he has to complete the ceremony before he enters or he will disappear. Sam was eager as well, telling Kyle to give him the knife so he could get on with the ceremony. The trunk of the tree was already covered with countless names, making it difficult for Sam to find a spot to put his own in. However, luckily, in searching the bottom, they were able to find an opening for both he and Parker to write their names down. They used the knife, carved them in, and then proceeded on to the next step. Kimber told them about the second part of the ritual. They had to chant a phrase before they could be allowed entrance. "Underneath the Triple Tree, there is a man who waits for me. And should I go, or should I stay? My fate's the same, either way." Sam found this to be a little eerie and asked Kimber what it meant. She said she's not sure if anyone knows anymore, that it's simply just tradition at this point. Regardless, Sam and Parker recite the poem and are finally allowed entrance into the Triple Tree. There wasn't much on the inside. A dirty rug, a few empty beer cans, and some fast food wrappers. The treehouse actually had 4 rooms. Sam didn't find much of note in any of them until he went into the last one. There was a dirty mattress with ripped clothes all around it. He said that the mattress smelled gross and asked if anyone was living in the treehouse. Kyle said no. No one lived in the treehouse. That mattress had simply been there as long as he could remember. Kimber chimed in, saying that the smell wasn't even the worst part, and pointed up to the ceiling. Written on it said "Road to the Gates of Hell, mile marker 1. The group doesn't question it long though, saying that sure, while it's creepy, it was probably just some older kids wanting to scare people. So they move on. They walked back into the main room of the treehouse and saw Parker grinning as he pointed at the floor to see that he had written the word fart into the wood with the knife. Parker is the comedic genius of our time. He is underappreciated. Kyle moved on from his annoyance with his brother and said that he heard something was here in the treehouse that he wanted to check out. Kyle took the knife from his brother and jammed it in between 2 planks of wood. He applied just a little bit of pressure before a secret compartment opened. He removed the wood, reached inside, and pulled out 2 warm cans of beer. He said that another boy that lived in town, a boy named Phil Saunders, had told him that this was here. All of the kids except for Parker, who didn't want any because he's a responsible 6-year-old, drink the beer, and they aren't exactly big fans of it. It took them an hour and a half to drink the 2 cans, and they spent the rest of their night wondering if they were drunk. They did some makeshift sobriety tests, such as saying the alphabet backwards, or walking in a straight line, and Kimber was just in the middle of doing one when she was interrupted by this incredibly loud, metallic groaning sound cascading down the mountainside. Everyone quit what they were doing and shut up while the sound just emanated down the mountainside into their ears. It lasted for what felt like 10 minutes before finally coming to a stop, and they all just sat in silence for a few moments. After a while, Sam asked what that was. No one said a word at first until Sam repeated himself, asking again, what was that sound? Kyle says it's nothing. Not really. They just hear it in town from time to time. It's only louder since they're up in the mountains, closer to the source. But Sam asked what specifically is making that sound, to which Kimber said one word: Borrasca. So Sam asks who's Borrasca, but is informed that Borrasca is not a person. Borrasca is a place, and not just another town, but some specific place, some singular location, somewhere in the mountains. And Kimber says more to herself than anyone else. Bad things happen there. Now Sam is eager to learn more about this Borrasca, but is getting frustrated by the vagueness of his friend's answers. Sam is asking more and more questions, but Kyle quickly shuts it down, saying that Sam should never try and find Borrasca, or bad things would happen to him too. After that, the group decides it's probably time to head back home for the night. They walk back from the treehouse to their bikes in a silence that only allowed for thoughts of Borrasca to eat away at Sam's mind. What was this place? Why were his friends being so vague about it? And what was that sound? He cautiously asked Kyle, who lives at Borrasca. But before Kyle can answer, Parker says that the people that live at Borrasca are the skinned men and the shiny gentleman. Kyle laughs at his younger brother, saying only children believe that stuff. But Sam is holding on to every word, wondering about the inhabitants of Borrasca. Who's the shiny gentleman? And are there people there that really have lost all their skin? Kyle says, no, none of this is true. This is simply an urban legend that little kids believe. Realizing that Sam isn't going to get any further with Kyle on this issue, he drops the subject and continues home, thoughts of Borrasca lingering in the back of his mind all the way. The first day of school began 2 days later. Sam gets dropped off to school by his father, Mr. Walker, and Sam isn't exactly excited about this. He wants to take the bus like his friends and even his older sister, but his father says he'll be allowed to do this when he's 13. Until then, he's gonna have to deal with getting dropped off by his dad. Sam is finally free to go meet up with Kyle and Kimber though, after saying goodbye to his father, and he meets them by the flagpole outside. Now, there are 2 6th grade teachers and 3 of them. They were hoping that they'd all get class together, but it didn't work out that way. Sam and Kimber are lucky enough to end up having class together, but Kyle not only doesn't have class with them, but also has a teacher that is known for being particularly rude, strict, and giving out a lot of homework, especially on the weekends. He swears aloud at his luck, to which an authoritative voice from behind him tells him to watch his language. The kids spin around to see the imposing figure of Sheriff Killian Clary standing behind them. Now, Clary is actually Mr. Walker's boss, so Sam has actually met him before and says he rather likes the man. He was actually at the school that day to give a presentation to the 3rd and 4th graders about the dangers of walking home alone. Stranger danger type deal. Clary doesn't stick around long though, as he needs to go get ready for his presentation, so the kids are left alone. But they notice that in their brief interaction with Clary, Kimber had left. See, Kyle laments that Kimber is annoyingly on time to everything, so she was already on her way to class. But with that, the first bell rang, and Kyle and Sam parted ways to go to their respective classes, and to start their first day of 6th grade, Sam's first day of school in Drisking. Sam walked into class and was delighted to see that Kimber was already saving him a seat next to her. Now, remember, Sam had moved in over summer break, and as such had really only gotten to meet Kyle and Kimber. So Kimber spent the morning taking Sam around and introducing him to all the other students in class. Most of them seemed nice enough to Sam, but he noticed that there was a group of girls sitting in front of them that Kimber had yet to introduce him to. They kept turning around and looking at Sam and Kimber, and then would laugh at them before turning back around. Sam asked Kimber who these girls were, but she just shrugged. About midway through the day, the class was allowed a quick break and Sam went to the back to sharpen his pencil. While he was doing so, this group of girls that kept turning around and laughing at them approached Sam at the pencil sharpener. They asked if he was friends with Kimber. When Sam answered yes, they wanted to know if he was related to Kimber, to which he said, "No, I'm just a friend of hers." They said they didn't think so since he doesn't have red hair like her. This was a girl named Phoebe Dranger, who went on to say that Sam didn't have to be friends with girls like Kimber DeStaro. Doing so would lead him to being unpopular. Sam said he wanted to be friends with Kimber and told the girls off, and they begrudgingly went back to their seats. When Sam went back to his desk, Kimber asked what the girls had said to him, and she looked rather worried. Now, Sam, being the absolute stand-up gentleman that he is, says the following. "They said you're too pretty to be near them, and that you make them look ugly in comparison. They'd like us to stay away from them." "Liar," Kimber answered, but I could hear the smile in her voice. Isn't their friendship just so wholesome? Come lunchtime, Sam and Kimber were able to meet up with Kyle, who lamented the entire time about how much he hated his teacher and hated his class. When Sam went to throw his lunch away, he accidentally ran into a kid that he hadn't met yet. He apologized, of course, and the kid said it was fine, looked at Sam, and asked if he was Sam Walker. Sam answered yes, to which the kid said that his older brother was dating Sam's older sister, Whitney. Now, Kyle began dying laughing because the boy's last name is Whittaker, meaning that if the two were to last and get married, Whitney's last name would be Whitney Whittaker. I don't think it's nearly as funny as Kyle, but anyways, instead of laughing, Sam is more perplexed by this, that Whitney has a boyfriend here in Drisking. As far as he could tell, besides the odd errand that their mother would send Whitney on from time to time just to get her out of the house, she didn't even leave her room. So how she had time to not only meet a boy, but also start dating him was beyond Sam. But he assumes that they met on one of these errands and had simply been dating through, text messaging pretty well. The school year continued on, and Sam began loving his time at Drisking. He got to know a lot of the classmates, became friends with them, and Drisking was starting to feel more and more like home. It wasn't until a month later that they were all out on the playground when they heard that metallic grinding sound yet again, the very one that they had heard that night that they went to the triple tree. Now, even though it was far more quiet than it was that night they were in the treehouse due to the proximity between the school and Borrasca being further than the triple tree and Borrasca, everyone still sat in silence until the sound had finished. Once it had concluded, Phil Saunders said, "The skinned men kill again." Now, this sparked somewhat of an argument between Kyle and Phil, with Kyle saying that only babies believe in the story of Borrasca. But Phil isn't having it. He swears that Borrasca, the skinned men, the shiny gentlemen, that all of it's real. He even states that one of their classmates, a girl named Danielle, had actually seen them before, and calls her over to confirm. So he gets her over and says, "Tell them about the skinned men." And she says, "Well, why don't you tell them about the skinned men?" Phil's a little frustrated and says, "I didn't see them. You did." But Danielle corrects him. See, it wasn't Danielle who had seen the skinned men. It was her older sister, Paige. This causes the group to go silent. And while Sam doesn't know why, he can tell that the conversation has quickly become uncomfortable for everyone who's a part of it. Danielle walks away, and when Sam asks what's that about, he's informed that Paige had disappeared some years ago. Phil adds that this is after she encountered the skinned men. Not long after this, the recess bell rang, calling them all back inside, but luckily for Sam, Phil was in his class and, unlike Kyle, seemed interested in talking about Borrasca, so Sam made sure when they filed in line that he sat right behind Phil. He asks Phil what he can tell him about Borrasca. Phil says that's where people go when they disappear, to Borrasca to meet the shiny gentleman. But Sam asks what does that mean? What happens when they actually get there and meet the shiny gentleman, or the skinned men, or whatever happens at Borrasca? And Phil just says bad things, and then shushes Sam as they head into class. It wasn't until a snowy December day that Sam once again heard the sounds of Borrasca. He looked outside his bedroom window, wondering what on earth could possibly be making that sound. As he was doing this, he saw his dad's police car pull into the driveway. He ran downstairs, excited to see his father, exclaiming that they never got to see each other anymore. This was due to the fact that Sheriff Clary was getting Mr. Walker prepared to take over the sheriff position, as Clary was going to retire soon. Now, with it fresh on his mind, Sam made sure to ask his father if he ever heard that sound, and his father said yes. Sam asked if he knew what it was, to which his father said he's not certain. He thinks it's just some logging equipment out somewhere in the mountains. When Sam asked if he knew if this place was called Borrasca, his father said that he had no idea. Sam pushes further though, asking if his father had heard of the shiny gentleman or the skinned men, to which his father scoffs at skinned men, thinking that his sister Whitney had told him these stories to scare him. So he yells at his daughter to quit telling Sam these stories. Whitney gets flustered by this, as she hadn't told Sam this, it was kids at school, and Sam backs her up on this, saying yes, it was kids at school that told him, not her. Regardless, Mr. Walker says he doesn't matter who told him this, the two should start getting along. They're siblings, and they should start acting like it. However, winter break came and went without Sam hearing the sounds of Borrasca again. On their first day back to school, Kimber is slammed into a wall by Phoebe Dranger and her gang. Sam and Kyle help her up and begin screaming insults at the girls. They say people only like them because they're related to the Prescotts. Kimber says she wants to be alone for a moment and excuses herself from the two boys. Sam says he should probably go to class to check on her, but Kyle reminds him that they aren't going to class in the morning, that instead they have an assembly over the history of Drisking. When they get there, they find that Kimber is already there, saving the two a seat. She seems to have cheered up considerably after, being slammed against a locker by Phoebe Dranger and her crew. The room silences as the presentation over Drisking's history begins. There are three people doing the presentation. A man named Wyatt Dowding and a woman named Catherine Scanlon are from the History Preservation Society of Drisking, and they are accompanied by none other than Jimmy Prescott. The mention of Jimmy Prescott surprises Kimber, as Jimmy's father, Tom Prescott, had been giving this presentation for 20 years. A boy named Patrick Sutton says that Tom Prescott had basically gone crazy and is now living in a home somewhere out of Drisking. The other Prescotts had put him there to try and save face and get him away from the city. Jimmy therefore had gone and taken over all of the businesses in town, anything that his father's name was on. Kimber says she doesn't like Jimmy very much, that he gives her the creep. She says Tom was much more like a warm grandfather type figure. Regardless of the kids' opinion on Jimmy and Tom Prescott, the presentation begins going over the history of Drisking and how it was founded as a mining town. Once that's done, Jimmy steps in and says that his family sort of stepped in the 1950s and shaped the town into what it is today. While bored during the initial half of the assembly, Sam actually found himself completely engrossed in Jimmy's presentation. He says that the man has this charisma about him. He's a fascinating storyteller, and he was hanging on to every word, laughing at every joke. Now, Sam found Jimmy's presentation to be so compelling that when it was the question and answers segment, he actually raised his hand to ask a question, much to Kyle's objection, telling him that this would be social suicide. But Sam didn't care. Mr. Prescott scanned the room and answered a few other questions before he finally got to be in the back. Yes, the young man in the blue shirt. Mr. Prescott, why did the mines close? Are there still any working? I asked. That's a very good question. What did you say your name was? Sam Walker. Ah, I believe I met your father the other day at the sheriff's office. Welcome to Drisking. As for your questions, most of the mines were closed in 1951 after a long period of unprofitability. The mountain had simply ran out of iron ore. The mills and refineries were abandoned, and the town suffered for years. The miners and their families moved away. Stores went out of business, schools closed, and Drisking became a ghost town, as I was explaining before. That would have been the end of it, if it weren't for stubborn families like mine who refused to leave. We refused to give up the town, and after many years of hard work, Drisking became the picturesque little haven in the Ozarks that it is today. As for your second question, yes, I believe there may still be one mine in operation. The assembly carried on for about 15 more minutes of Q&A before all the students were allowed to leave and go to lunch. Now Kyle makes fun of Sam for asking a question, but Sam defends it, saying that mines are creepy. He wanted to learn more about them. However, Kyle shares that it doesn't matter. Sam wouldn't be able to explore any of these mines anyways, creepy or not, as they were blown up years ago. Kimber jumps in and says that many years ago, some kids went missing in the mines, and though they were never found, they ended up blowing up the mines to make sure that no one else ever went missing up there again. Apparently this didn't go as planned though, as some of the runoff of the explosions actually ended up going into Drisking's water table. This leads to Kyle making a joke that water is contaminated by C4 or explosives or something along those lines, saying that they're all ticking time bombs and that one day they're all just going to explode. Kyle jokes that maybe this is even how the Skin Men came to be. They were just drinking water one day and then blew up and lost all their skin in the process. And then the boys basically just pretend to blow up in the cafeteria. You guys are dumb. Kimber rolled her eyes and then she laughed when Kyle fell on the floor pretending he was exploding. I remember thinking in that moment that I was happy here in Drisking, Missouri with these two people. Happier than I'd ever been anywhere else. It was the last true moment of joy I ever had. Less than an hour after this, Sam's teacher informs him that his mother is there to pick him up. Sam became anxious. As far as he knew, there wasn't any reason he should be getting picked up from school early that day. He packed up his bag and, after sharing one last worried look at Kimber, headed out the door to meet his mother at the office. Mrs. Walker was crying when Sam got to her. The two rode home in a strained silence, Sam not knowing what to say and being too afraid to ask what happened. As they got closer to the Walker home, Sam could see police cars parked outside. He painfully gathered the courage to ask his mother what had happened. She said that Whitney didn't make it to school that day. Now at this, Sam is actually kind of relieved, as earlier in the morning, before even he had left for school, he saw Whitney get in a car with Pete Whittaker, who he knew to be her boyfriend, and their friend Taylor. He assumes that they just skipped school. To Sam's dismay though, Mrs. Walker says that they already knew all of that, and that Pete and Taylor made it to school that day, but Whitney did not. Apparently, she had asked them to drop her off at a gas station next to Drisking High School, and no one had seen her since. Mrs. Walker says that they believe she ditched school and is hitchhiking back to St. Louis to meet up with her boyfriend, Jay. Now, Sam says this doesn't make sense. If she has a boyfriend here in Drisking, why would she need to go back to her ex-boyfriend in St. Louis? But Mrs. Walker says that they found half her clothes missing and some money from Mr. Walker's wallet gone, leading them to believe that she took the money and some clothes and is heading back to start a life with Jay in St. Louis. Sam walks into the house to find his father and Sheriff Clary in the kitchen going over phone records. Sam tells them everything he knows, that around 6 or 7 in the morning, Whitney had left with Taylor and Pete, and that Pete is her boyfriend, so she wouldn't go back to Jay. Sam's got a lot of growing up to do. Now, no matter how much Sam rebuts the fact that Whitney wouldn't be going back to St. Louis, they all still believe that this is the case. Everyone's story is lining up. They're not just gonna go off a hunch that Sam has. Sam is told to go to his room by his parents while they sit and try and figure this out. He's reluctant to do so, saying that he can stay and help, but Clary says that he's done all he can and that he's been a good brother. Go to his room and let the adults figure it out. Sam is in his room alone now, frustrated, angry that the adults won't listen to him. Regardless of how rough his relationship with his sister is and how little they seem to get along, Whitney is still Sam's sister. He still loves her and is sitting there, sick to his stomach, anxious about where she could be. With nothing else to do, Sam sits down on his computer and checks his email, expecting there to be countless messages from Kyle and Kimber asking what's going on and if he's okay. But when he logs on, he sees that there is only one. It just said, "Did Whitney go to the treehouse?" Sam remembers Kimber's words of warning from the previous summer, saying that if someone were to enter the treehouse without completing the proper ritual, they would disappear. Sam didn't believe that Whitney was dropped off at a gas station, nor that she was going to St. Louis. He instead believed that she and her boyfriend had went to that treehouse, and that something bad had happened there. Maybe she'd been left behind, or forgotten, or worst of all, maybe one of the skinned men had come for her. Sam left the house, not even needing to sneak out due to how busy his parents were. He grabbed his bike and took off towards the West Rim Prescott Ore Trail, and when he got there, he saw that Kyle and Kimber were already there waiting for him. They said their condolences, and Kimber gave Sam a hug, telling him how sorry she was. They walked to the triple tree in silence. When they finally got there, Sam began screaming his sister's name, begging for some sort of response. He went into the treehouse, darting around every room looking for something, but there was no sign of her. He flew back down the ladder, not knowing what to do next. And then he heard Kimber quietly say his name. She was pointing at something at the base of the triple tree. His eyes followed her finger down and saw there, at the bottom of the tree, freshly carved into the wood, the name Whitney W. And tears began to build in Sam's eyes as the sound of the metallic, groaning sound of Borrasca blew down the mountainside. And that is the end of part 1 of Borrasca. Part 2 resumes with that poem for the triple tree. Underneath the triple tree, there is a man who waits for me. Should I go or should I stay? My fate's the same either way. Sam is dreaming all of this, but is suddenly awoken by the sound of a voice saying, "Well, good morning." He opens his eyes to see Jimmy Prescott standing before him. It'd been several years since the events of part 1. Sam is now a teenager, about 17 years old, in his senior year of high school. And where we find him currently, he is working in the Prescott sandwich shop. Though he's not being the best worker, as he is dozing in and out of sleep. He had been out late the night before, drinking and partying at a bonfire with some of his classmates. Now, Jimmy is aware of this, and teases Sam, asking if he was out doing so last night, to which Sam lies and says absolutely not. He apologizes to Jimmy for dozing off, and Prescott assures him that it's fine, and asks Sam to start preparing his lunch order. Once the sandwich is made, Jimmy asks if Mira is in the shop today. Now, Mira is Sam's boss. She is the manager of the sandwich shop. Sam assures Jimmy that Mira is in fact in today, and Jimmy asks if he can go get her for him. Sam finds Mira in the back, going over the finances of the store, and looking disheveled, a usual state that he finds Mira in. Sam informs Mira that Jimmy is there to see him, and she asks if he said why. Sam says no, he just asked if I could get you for him, and she says that Sam is good to go ahead and go home for the day. Sam asks why, he still has 3 hours left on his shift, but she reminds him he's the only customer they've had that day. There's no point in keeping Sam around and just wasting his time. She promises that she'll pay him for the whole day, and says that he's free to leave. Sam thanks Mira and wishes her luck dealing with Prescott, and heads out the back door after clocking out, as he doesn't want to go through the front because he doesn't want to see Jimmy again. Over the years since Sam had moved to Drisking, his opinion on Jimmy had changed. When he was a kid, at that presentation for example, he found Jimmy to be a very funny and charismatic guy, rather likable even. Sam now thinks Prescott, though still being charismatic and funny from time to time, is a lot more like a tool whose yellowed amber eyes give him the creeps. But Sam got the day off, so he doesn't even have to worry about that. So he hops in his car and calls Kyle to see where he is. Kyle informs him that he, Kimber, and pretty well everyone else from their class is at Crystal Lake. So Sam takes off to meet them, especially excited because Crystal Lake is Sam's favorite spot in all of Drisking. The lake was packed, meaning it took Sam a while to find his friends, but when he finally did, he saw Kyle and Kimber sitting on a large rock that overlooked the majority of the lake. He found Kimber sunbathing, with Kyle sitting next to her, the two drinking beers and relaxing. Kimber offered Sam a beer, to which he, still hungover, denied, but still sat down next to his friends and began looking out over the beach. Sam's eyes fell upon Phoebe Dranger and her friend. It seemed strange to Sam to only see 2 of the 3 girls together, but one of them, a girl named Christy, had actually run away with some college guys some time before, meaning that the infamous trio was now simply a duo. As strange and sudden as it was for Christy to abandon her friends, Sam didn't think much of it, and went back to enjoying his day. At some point, Kimber asks Sam why he got off work early, and he says that it's because Jimmy Prescott came in. At this, Kimber squirmed, saying that Prescott gave her the creeps, especially since she was pretty sure he'd been checking her out since 7th grade. To this, Kyle tells Kimber to let him know the next time Prescott makes her uncomfortable, and that he would knock him out. Here, Sam informs the readers that Kyle and Kimber are actually dating now, and Kyle is very protective of Kimber, something that will continue to happen a lot throughout this story. Moving on, the trio make fun of Jimmy Prescott for a while before the subject changes to his father, Tom Prescott, who, if you recall, was put into a retirement home a few towns over. Apparently, he had developed dementia, and Jimmy found him to be embarrassing, so he put him in that retirement home a few towns over to save face. The conversation ends here, however, as they are interrupted by Phil Saunders and Patrick Sutton. Kyle notably only says hi to Patrick, as sometime earlier, Phil and Kimber had actually dated, and because of that, Kyle now hates Phil. Patrick offers Sam a hit from the pipe he was smoking, but Phil calls him stupid for doing so, saying that Sam is the sheriff's son. He cannot be caught getting high. So that means in the years between the two parts, Sheriff Clary has retired and handed his position to Sam's father, who is now Sheriff Walker. Phil goes on to tell Sam that the only reason he's even high in front of him is because it is 5 years to the day since his cousin Hannah had disappeared, and that frankly, he just doesn't care. The mention of this causes Patrick to say that far too many people have disappeared in the woods here in Drisking. He seems to be right too, as he goes on to list several names, including Hannah, Paige, and lastly, Whitney. Patrick rebuts his friend's claim, saying that Whitney didn't disappear, like in Drisking. She had instead went to St. Louis to meet up with her old boyfriend. Phil asks if this was true, and after a long pause, Sam says yes, it's true. Whitney hitchhiked to St. Louis to meet up with her old boyfriend, and we never saw her again. The truth is, though, Sam didn't believe this. See, he had quietly kept to himself over the years since Whitney's disappearance that he believed that the official story wasn't true. He doesn't believe any part of the original story other than that his sister cannot be found. He spent years searching online for any mention of Whitney or her ex-boyfriend Jay, and one day he finally found Jay on social media. He browsed his profile looking for any sign of his sister, but when he clicked on that profile, he didn't find any trace of Whitney whatsoever. This young man had moved on from his previous girlfriend all those years ago, seemingly the furthest thing from his mind. Sam brought this to his father's attention, and though this sort of debunks the official statement, or at least calls it into question, nothing was done about this, and the case of Whitney remained closed. Sam had always wanted to talk to Kyle and Kimber about this, to bring them in on the pain he was feeling and his obsession with Whitney and anything that had to do with her disappearance. And though he loved Kyle and Kimber, he just couldn't bring himself to bring this up to them. He certainly couldn't tell them that even after all these years, he was still obsessed with not only her, but the fact that something to do with Borrasca and the skinned men and the shiny gentleman had something to do with her disappearance. He just couldn't prove what. After all, without actually knowing what Borrasca or any of these things are, how can he prove that it or the triple tree or any of these things have to do with Whitney's disappearance? It was a hunch, a gut feeling that he felt and believed completely. He just couldn't prove it, nor could he bring himself to tell anyone about it. Sam was brought back from his thoughts by Kyle, sensing a tension in the air since mentioning Whitney, shooed Phil and Patrick off, telling them, leave us alone for a while. Sam watched the two leave as Kyle and Kimber talked about how Kimber had to leave early. See, Kimber's mom had been depressed for quite some time, and because of that, Kimber, who was exceptionally close with her mother, tried to be there for her when she could. Sam and Kyle were bummed to see that their friend had to leave early, but understood. But Kimber left on a good note, reminding them that this was their last week of school. And the following day should have been a very fun day, as it was actually their ditch day. However, Sam sometimes hated being the sheriff's son, as he was not allowed to skip. The police department was actually cracking down on truancy, meaning that the other kids that skipped would likely give Sam hell for it. So, Sam had to be there. And he argued with his father over and over again that this is tradition, that this is just something students do. Please, just let us skip. We're just gonna have fun. It's not that big a deal. Everyone does it. But Sam's father was having none of it. Sheriff Walker even going as far as to say he really hopes that Kyle's name doesn't come across his desk the following day. Sam says that he can't control what Kyle does, but he'd see what he can do. Sam stormed off to his room, but on his way, he passed Whitney's old room. The door was closed, but the light was still on, and Sam knew that his mother was in there. She was always in there anymore. Sam was actually able to convince not only Kimber, but Kyle as well to attend school with him that day and not skip, something Kyle was not happy about, but agreed to do for his friend. And just as Sam suspected, there were remarkably little students there that day, only about 8 in attendance, and the glares he received from these other students made it very clear to Sam that his father was the reason they were in attendance. On their lunch break, Sam and Kyle went outside to Sam's car to get high. See, Sam might be the sheriff's son, but he is not exactly a law-abiding citizen. Kimber wouldn't join them, as around 4th period, her mother called and asked if Kimber could come home. There had been a recent development since Kyle and Kimber had started dating, in that Kimber's mom, Mrs. Estaro, absolutely hated Kyle. He suspects that she had always hated him and just never let it show, but that since they started dating, she just couldn't hide it anymore and explicitly stated her hatred towards Kyle, especially he and Kimber's being together. After some talking, Kyle and Sam decided they just shouldn't go back at all. A police officer had already come to collect attendance, and Sam figured he'd been there half the day, he'd been a good son, let's just go leave. Per Kyle's request, Sam actually drops him off at Kimber's place and promises that once he gets off his shift, he will go pick him up. And at this point, Sam goes to work. He figures if he gets there a little early, he might be able to go home a little early as well. When he walked into the sandwich shop, he saw that there was actually no one at the counter. This wasn't that surprising though, as only 3 people actually worked there. Sam, Mira, and a girl named Emmeline. Now Sam actually had a crush on Emmeline, so he was hoping the two would be able to work together quite frequently. Much to Sam's dismay, the two actually ended up working opposite shifts, so he never got to see the girl that he liked. Sam went into the back to tell Mira that he was here to start working early, and he found her again slumped over all the paperwork on her desk, though this time, Mira was crying. Sam awkwardly tries to comfort Mira, not really knowing what to do, and Mira asks what she's doing wrong. Since she had been put in charge of managing the store, numbers had gone down, business was failing, and to make matters worse, Jimmy Prescott wouldn't let her advertise anywhere because he thought the advertisements looked ugly. She'd been running in the red the whole time she'd been in charge, and she couldn't take it anymore. She quickly corrects herself though, realizing that these aren't poor Sam's problems, and tells him he's good to go and start a shift, just go man the counter in case anyone comes in. Sam was fine by this, eager to end this awkward interaction. However, being at the front of the store away from Mira isn't much better, as even through the walls, he can hear her crying. After a little while of this, he decides something needs to be done, so he calls Mira's husband, Owen. He explains the situation to Owen after apologizing for calling him at home, and Owen says he'd be there soon. When Owen comes in, Sam asks if Mira's okay, and Owen says they've been having some problems lately. The financial issues with the store are only a small part of this. In their personal lives, Owen and Mira are actually trying to have a baby, but they've encountered some fertility issues, of which Mira actually completely blames on Owen. See, Owen goes on to say that Mira has somewhat of an obsession with having a kid. She is actually the last of her bloodline. Owen goes on to say, I understand why it's important to her. I just don't understand the obsession with it, you know? Because she's the last one in her family? Because she's the last McCaskey on the planet. I mean, does she even realize that our baby wouldn't be a McCaskey? He'd be a Daly. I tell you, Sam, never marry a woman with a crazy father and 4 dead uncles. They develop these obsessions with lineage and... 4 dead uncles? What? Oh, yeah, the famous ones. You know, the 4 brothers who died in the Drisking mines. Well, that only left her dad, and her parents were only able to conceive her, which leaves her as the last McCaskey and hope for the family line. So of course you see how this is all my fault. I looked at him blankly and he sighed. I'm sorry, kid. These aren't your problems, and they're way over your pay grade anyways. I'm just very stressed out right now. Our medical issues and Mira's absolute abhorrence to our only other option. But how did they die? I was desperate to talk about anything else, and the story of Mira's uncles interested me. The McCaskey boys? I don't really know. They died on the mountain somewhere. Oh, well, have you heard of the Skinned Men? Skinned Men? Yeah, I don't think so. What about Borrasca? Owen Daly squeezed his eyes shut and pushed in on his temple with his fingers. What? What does a Borrasca have to do with anything? Before Sam can ask any more questions, Mira comes out of the back having heard her husband's voice. Owen tries to ask if she's okay, but before he can get the sentence out, Mira says, "I want to do it." Owen seems surprised by this, asking if whatever it is she's talking about is really what she wants to do, to which she says, "I already called him." Now Sam is acutely aware that he is hearing something that does not pertain to him, and nor does he want it to. The Dailies seem to take notice of this, and Owen says that Sam's good to go ahead and just take the day off. Now Sam doesn't object to this and heads out the door, but he calls Kyle, telling him that he heard something really weird and that he can't tell him over the phone, he just needs to tell him in person, so he asks where he is. Kyle informs him he is still at Kimber's house if they want to meet up and talk about it. Now what Kyle means by at Kimber's house is that he was thrown out of Kimber's house by Kimber's mother and is now sitting on the curb in front of the house. When Sam arrives, Kimber comes out of the house and apologizes and says that her mother's just having a very bad episode today. Kyle says this is fine, that he just hopes they're okay, and that he'll just meet up with her later. Kimber has to babysit some kids later in the day, so they make plans to meet up around 7:30 p.m. when she's done. And with that, Sam and Kyle head out on their own, with Sam telling Kyle the interesting conversation he overheard at the sandwich shop, mostly pertaining to Borrasca. Sam begins to speculate if the disappearance of the four McCaskies could have something to do with the other disappearances in town. Kyle says he has no idea, but maybe if all the disappearances started around the same time, they could all be connected. They decide that the best way to figure this out would be by checking the town's historical records, and where better to do this than the History Preservation Society of Drisking. On the way, Kyle asks, why is this all so important to Sam? This is just a childhood urban legend. Why does he care so much? But Sam simply responds with one word: Whitney. Kyle doesn't push the issue any further. The boys enter the history building and are quickly meted by Mrs. Scanlon, the very same woman who gave them their presentation way back in 6th grade alongside Jimmy Prescott. She sits them down and asks what she can help them with today. They sat down and asked how the McCaskey boys died. Well, they didn't die. I mean, they certainly perished in the mines, but their bodies were never recovered, so we don't know the answer to that. I would think dehydration, starvation, and exhaustion killed them within a few days of getting lost down there. All of this happened in the year 1953. The mines were set to be closed immediately following their disappearance to make sure no one else got lost, but the Prescotts objected, making sure the city kept the mines open so they could send search crews in to find the McCaskey boys. See, the McCaskies and the Prescotts were actually closely related, and Tom Prescott personally funded teams to go into the mines to find them. However, the city began objecting, and there was actually a legal battle between the Prescotts and the city of Drisking about whether or not the mines should be closed before the bodies are recovered. The Prescotts lost this battle though, and the city banned teams from being able to go search for them. So now, the Prescotts would actually go in themselves, searching it through these mines to try and find Mira's four uncles. However, the city's fears of more people dying or getting lost in the mines were proven correct when one of the Prescotts, while searching for the McCaskies, perished within the mines. Less than a week later, the city set the mines to blow up to make sure no one else could go in or get lost. However, Drisking's misfortune had not run out quite yet. See, because the mines had been dry for a while, profitability was at an all-time low, meaning the city didn't have a bunch of money to fund good teams to do the demolition on the mine. So, they got a less than reputable team to do so, and when they did, they miscalculated where the blast would go. Because of this, the runoff from the mine, as we heard earlier, went into the water and contaminated the water supply. The city went into debt to try and clean the water, but it wasn't until about 2 years later that the Prescotts were able to come in and start turning the town's luck around and making the city profitable once again. Once Mrs. Scanlon is done telling her story, Kyle gets a text from Kimber saying that she wants the boys to come to where she is babysitting. So the two boys thank her for her time, and she lets them know that if they have any other questions, please come talk to her. Her door is always open, and she loves helping people with this type of thing. So the boys go and meet up with Kimber. There's 3 kids she's babysitting. 2 are older, out playing in the middle of the yard, whereas Kimber is holding a baby in her arms. They fill Kimber in on what happened, and she says, well, it is certainly an interesting story. She doesn't understand why the boys are so fascinated about something that happened all those years ago, to which they once again say it has to do with Whitney. See, they feel that somehow everything in Drisking is connected, from the disappearance to the McCaskies, to the Triple Tree, Borrasca, the Skinned Men, the Shiny Gentlemen, the Prescotts, all the way up to Whitney's disappearance. They just don't know how. They decide that if they want to get to the bottom of this, who better is there to go to than the source, Tom Prescott. The care facility that he was put in was located about 40 minutes outside of Drisking, so they make plans that the following day, after school, they would drive out there and go try and talk to Tom. And so the next day drags on, anticipation eating away at them the entire day. Sam cannot focus on classes. He is simply thinking about meeting up with Tom later and getting to the bottom of this. By the time the bell rings and Sam is able to go to his car, he finds that Kyle and Kimber are already out there waiting for him. Due to traffic, it took significantly longer than they thought it would to get to the care facility, to the point that when they got there was only 20 minutes left of visiting hours. They walk up to the nurse at the front counter and tell her that they are here to see Tom Prescott. Now, the nurse seems surprised by this, saying that Tom doesn't get visitors except once a year on Christmas when Jimmy Prescott comes. Kimber lies to the lady at the front desk and says that Tom Prescott is actually her great uncle. This works, and they are escorted into the facility to find Tom Prescott. He's sitting alone in the corner of a sunroom, playing with a chess piece while he talks to himself. Kimber says his name to get his attention, saying Tom Prescott. He doesn't respond, and Kimber is about to repeat himself when the man slams his fist onto the table and begins screaming. He is, in fact, Tom Prescott, but he does not answer to Tom Prescott, as he is Mr. Prescott to them. He says that back in his day, kids used to have more respect for adults. Kimber apologizes to Tom, saying that she didn't mean any disrespect. The old man is not having it and is ranting and raving that his son is ruining his town with vulgarity and disrespect. Kimber tries to steer the conversation back on track, saying that of course they all remember Mr. Prescott. He is the man that basically built their town and made it what it is today, and they have the utmost respect for him. He asks who Kimber is, to which she lies again and says that she is Mira McCaskey's child. Tom brushes past this. At this point, he's mostly talking to himself, or just at Kimber, Sam, and Kyle, and says that back in his day, when he was running the town, he could pretty well get away with whatever he wanted, so long as the money was coming in. The townsfolk might not have liked where the money was coming from, but they did like that money was coming in. Therefore, they chose to ignore it and let him do whatever he wanted. Now, of course, Kyle, Sam, and Kimber don't know what he's talking about, but they try and steer the conversation in the right direction with subtle poking and prodding. Kimber asks if the money is still coming in, to which Tom laughs and says, well, you're here, aren't you? Here he begins talking about some kind of powder. He says it's a soft, fine powder that's made up in the mountains. He says that the powder doesn't know it's bad, it's people who say it's bad, but that whatever it was that went into making this powder needed to be done. By now, Kimber has him roped in. They think they can get whatever they want from him if they just keep going in this direction. So Kimber says that she thinks Jimmy isn't running the town in a way that Mr. Prescott would approve of. Well, of course he isn't. The elderly Prescott slammed his fist on the table again, and 2 rooks tumbled to the floor. They were mine. He took them from me. He thought he could do it better, but he took mine, and he ruined my legacy. Decades of work, and now it's all run by the powder. The dust of my crumbled empire. Now Sam just can't help himself, so he takes this moment to ask what about Borrasca, the Skinned Men, the Triple Tree, all the usual stuff that he's talking about. And Tom Prescott misinterprets Triple Tree for triple the price and starts saying that if Jimmy's charging triple the price for whatever it is he's talking about, then he really is running his business into the ground, that they only charge triple price once when times were slow, but they need to get Jimmy on the phone right this instant so Tom can, I don't know, yell at him, I guess. And in his yelling to get Jimmy on the phone, it actually alerted the staff that the three kids might be bothering this old man, so they escort them out. The whole while they're leaving, even through the lobby and out the front door, they can hear Tom Prescott demanding that someone get Jimmy on the phone. So they get back in the car and begin driving home. It is another silent car ride while Sam tries to put everything together. He thinks of the pieces of the puzzle that they already know about. Borrasca, the triple tree, the disappearances of the McCaskies going all the way up to Whitney, and the Prescotts. But now they have a new piece, the powder. They presume that it might be drugs of some sort, that maybe all of this leads to some sort of drug empire, perhaps ran by the Prescotts themselves. Sam's thoughts are interrupted by Kyle pulling the car over and turning around to face his friend. See, Kyle and Kimber are with Sam 100% of the way, no matter what he chooses. But before they go any further, they need to make sure that Sam is doing this for the right reasons. After all, the official police report about Whitney's death is believable, if not more than likely the case. I mean, she was not happy about the move to Drisking, and sure, while she made some friends and even got a boyfriend, she still had to leave her ex-boyfriend Jay behind, all her other friends, and everything she loved back at St. Louis. It makes sense that she would decide to just hitchhike back home. Even if that's not the most logical thing for her to do, it does make the most sense when looking at it in terms of like foul play or anything like that. Certainly more sense than something to do with skinned men coming together like Sam thinks. Not only are they making sure that this isn't just some childhood obsession of Sam's and that he's looking at it logically, if this is going the way they think it's going, it's looking like this could have to do with some sort of drug trade, perhaps an empire ran by the Prescotts. And if the police know what happened to Whitney and are lying about it by pushing the story of her going back to St. Louis, that means the cops are involved in this cover-up as well, perhaps a part of this drug empire. This means, obviously, this is dangerous, what they're getting involved in. They are just three teenagers about to graduate. Is this something that is actually worth them potentially ruining their lives over? Sam thinks it through. He knows he shouldn't ask Kyle and Kimber to go along this journey with him. He knows that if it gets dangerous, he would be dragging his friends into hell. But he looks at them and says, I have to know what happened to Whitney. And Kyle and Kimber nod. They are with him every step of the way, no matter how deep this goes. But before they can discuss a game plan further, Kimber's phone begins to ring. She looks down and sees that it's a phone call from her dad. When she answers it, she hears him frantically on the other end of the line, telling her that something happened to her mother and that she's in the hospital. Kyle quickly puts the car in drive and floors it to the hospital, making the drive in record time. When they get there, the police are already waiting for them and escort them inside. Sheriff Walker and Mr. DeStaro are sitting there waiting for their kids, and while Sheriff Walker takes his son one way, Mr. DeStaro takes Kimber in the other. And before Sam can ask his dad what happened, he sees across the hall Kimber fall to her knees, wailing and crying. It was, for the most part, a normal day for Mrs. DeStaro. She had went to the grocery store that morning, got the groceries to come home and make dinner, put the dinner in the fridge, and then she drove to the hospital, went up all the flights of stairs to the roof, and jumped off the edge. She had taken her own life. It had been 2 days since Sam or Kyle had seen or heard from Kimber, and in that time, they had fallen off somewhat. They never realized how much Kimber had actually kept them in check. Without her, they were getting high, skipping class, and all around just not holding up their responsibilities. Even in the 2 days' time, they realized just how important Kimber was to them, just to be functional humans. Kyle was, of course, a mess. He felt that he should be there for his girlfriend, but she wouldn't let him in. Sam tried to calm her down, saying that Kimber is doing what's best for her right now, and whenever she is ready, she will reach out to them and let them help. But for now, they just need to respect her privacy and her wishes and wait for her to reach out to them. But Kyle asks if the silence perhaps has something to do with the note. This is in reference to a supposed note that Kimber's mom had left behind before she passed. The day that Mrs. DeStaro had died, Sam had heard Mr. DeStaro say something about a note that she had left. However, in the official police report, there's no mention of it. So Sam went and asked his dad if he knows anything about this note, to which he said no such note exists, and that Sam must have misheard Mr. DeStaro. Sam and Kyle don't buy this, though. Sam knew he had heard Mr. DeStaro say something about a note, and while he tried to rationalize it as perhaps the man was grieving and didn't know what he was saying. He knew deep down he was just trying to make an excuse to believe the police's word. And they began to wonder if perhaps this was yet another puzzle piece. After all, if the police were covering it up like they believe they covered up Whitney's story, then who's to say that this doesn't connect to Borrasca, the Prescotts, the powder, and everything else in some way? But for now, they just had to sit, not knowing. The boys had thought about skipping their final day of senior year, their final day of high school, for that matter. And though they were leaning in favor of that, for one reason or another, they decided to attend that day. It was Sam's second period biology class, where he was resting his head on his desk before class actually started, when he felt a hand on his back. He turned around to see it was Kimber. She had returned. The two caught up and quickly after class decided that they needed to go see Kyle, as Kimber had not seen him yet. The two hugged in the hallway and began to catch up on what had been going on and seeing how Kimber was doing, given the circumstances. And while they felt terrible about it, Kyle and Sam knew they had to ask Kimber about the note. They didn't want to pry this information out of their grieving friend, but they knew if it connected to everything they had to know. And so they asked if a note was left behind. And Kimber confirmed their suspicions. Her mother did in fact leave a note behind for Kimber. Sam and Kyle asked what it said, but Kimber said she didn't know. Mr. DeStaro had gotten to the note before Kimber could and had it in his bedroom. She was not allowed to read it, nor was she allowed to really tell anyone about it. They asked why hadn't she snuck in and read it, to which she said her dad never leaves the room. He just sits in there crying. So, they decided to come up with a plan to get Kimber into that room to read the note. The following day was Mrs. DeStaro's funeral. At some point during the service, Kyle and Sam would go up and talk to Mr. DeStaro to distract him. During this point, Kimber would sneak out the back and send Kyle a text saying that she was having a breakdown in the bathroom and could use his help to feel better. Now this of course wouldn't be the case. Kyle would have Sam's car keys on him and would actually sneak out of the funeral with Kimber to go to her house, get into the bedroom, read the note, and then try and come back before the service ended. So, the following day, they put the plan into motion. Upon entering the church the funeral was being held in, Sam and Kyle quickly realized it wouldn't take much convincing to get people to believe Kimber was having a breakdown. She was sitting in one of the pews in the back, quietly sobbing in her hands. Her two friends came to comfort her, and she sobbed that her mother had lived in Drisking her whole life. She had countless friends, and yet no one was at the funeral. Sam looked up and saw Kimber was right. There was astonishingly few people there, just a few little clusters of 3 and 4 throughout the room. They became afraid that it would be hard for them to sneak out without anyone noticing with there being so few people. But when the service started, Kimber leaned over and said she was ready. So she snuck out the back while Kyle and Sam went to the front to talk to Mr. DeStaro. He was standing next to the casket when Sam and Kyle said their apologies for her loss, that she was a wonderful woman and a great mother. And whatever reaction they were expecting certainly wasn't the one that they got. Mr. DeStaro actually snapped on them, saying that if she was such a great mother, she wouldn't have left Kimber behind, and that if she was such a great woman, she wouldn't have left this spectacle for her family to deal with. Of course, the man was grieving and upset. Regardless, the boys were taken aback by what he said. Luckily, Kyle felt his phone go off and went to check his pocket. The plan was in motion. He informed the two men that it was Kimber, that she was having a breakdown in the bathroom and he was going to go check on her. But much to his surprise, Mr. DeStaro once again snapped, saying, "No, you don't talk to my daughter. You don't go anywhere near my daughter." And he pointed to Sam and said he can go check on him. Sam, not really knowing what else to do, went to the back to find the spot where he and Kyle were supposed to meet up. See, Sam didn't have the car keys. Kyle did, and there was simply no way, with Mr. DeStaro keeping such a close eye on Kyle, that he was going to be able to get them from him. So Sam went to find Kimber to tell her basically that the plan was off, or at the very least that they needed to reconsider what they were going to do. But when he went to their meeting spot, he found that Kimber wasn't there. Sam sent Kimber a text asking where she was, and after a minute or two, he got a response. See, Kimber didn't even know the plan had gone wrong. What she did know was that before it started, Kyle had actually given her the keys just in case something were to come up. So Kimber simply couldn't wait any longer. She apologized for leaving without them, but said that she had to know. Sam didn't feel great about this, but he texted her to be safe. Sam knew that if their story is to be believed, he couldn't be seen. So he snuck into the bathroom, sat in one of the stalls, and waited for about 20 minutes to hear back from Kimber. By this point, he was texting her, asking if she was on her way back, saying that the service was ending soon. He didn't get a response though, so he started calling her, but was sent to voicemail over and over again. When he finally felt his phone vibrate, he was hopeful that it was Kimber, but when he pulled it out, he saw that it was Kyle, asking if they were on their way back yet. The service was over. Sam left the stall and went to find Kyle and informed him of what happened. At this point, Kyle too started trying to call Kimber, but she wouldn't answer him either. They knew that they needed to keep Mr. DeStaro distracted before Kimber got back, so that way he wouldn't notice that she was gone. But when they looked and found him, they saw that he was already being talked to by Killian Clary and 2 other sheriff deputies. They couldn't hear the conversation, but they could tell through the movements of everyone that Clary and the other 2 cops were mad at Kimber's father about something, and he shook his head in defiance about whatever it was. He looked upset, not in an angry sort of way, but miserable. Whatever they were telling him was ending his world in front of him, and he didn't know what to do. At the end of the conversation, he slumped down in one of the church pews in defeat, while 2 of the deputies that were with Clary left the building. Kyle told Sam to call Kimber back right that second. Something was going on, and they needed to find out what it was before it was too late. Once again, Sam went to voicemail. Kyle told him to call her again and again and again until they got an answer. Kyle pulled out his own phone, but instead of calling Kimber, Sam could hear that he called Phil Saunders. He told them he needed to pick up right this instant and that he'll owe him. Just get down there now. They sat as they waited for what felt like an eternity on Phil to pull into the parking lot, looking out the window, making sure that they were ready the second he pulled in. Then they got a text. Kyle looked down at his phone to see it was from Kimber, saying that she had found the letter. Kyle texted her back instantly, saying, "They're coming for you." Just as Phil's car pulled into the parking lot, they got one last text from Kimber. "They're here." The boys jumped into Phil's car and made him floor it all the way to the DeStaro household, but when they got there, they found that the door was unlocked and the house was empty. Kimber was nowhere to be found, nor was the letter. Sam's car was still parked in the driveway, unlocked, and with his keys in the passenger seat. Taking Sam's car, he and Kyle went back to the funeral home to check if Kimber was there, but she wasn't. They went back and forth between the DeStaro household and the funeral home, checking if maybe they had got lost somewhere along the way. They called Kimber's phone so many times that it had to be dead by now. After half an hour, they felt they had no other point. They had to get in touch with Sam's dad and see if the police could do anything about this. They called him saying that they couldn't find Kimber anywhere and that something bad had happened. He told them to take a deep breath, come down to the station, and they'll make an official statement. In the meantime, he was going to send a couple of officers to investigate the DeStaro household. Sam forwarded the car to the station, but Kyle objected, saying, "How can we be sure we can trust the cops? After all, it's looking more and more like they might be involved in this." But Sam says, "We're not trusting the cops. We're trusting my dad." Besides, it's not like they had other options at this point anyways. When they arrived at the station, Sheriff Walker was already waiting for them. He brought them into his office and told them that in a few minutes, an officer named Ramirez was going to come take statements from them. But before he did, he wanted to tell them that how it was looking right now was that the DeStaros had left town willingly. Now, Sam and Kyle objected to this, saying Kimber wouldn't have left, not now. To which Sheriff Walker says, it wasn't really up to Kimber if she leaves or not, since she is a minor. If her father decided that they were going to leave, then they were going to leave. They insist Kimber would have texted or called or something, but Sheriff Walker says that grief can do things to people. That maybe she just wants to be away from everything for a while. Her and her dad are just going to go on a vacation to get away from things, get away from the town that their mom lived in, where all these memories remain. A way to try and get away from the pain for a while, but Sam and Kyle aren't buying it. But Sheriff Walker assures them, no matter what it's looking like, he will investigate this thoroughly to make sure that everything is okay with Kimber and the DeStaros. But at this, Sam mocks his father, saying, "Like how you investigated Whitney's disappearance thoroughly?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt awful for saying it, but his father was heated. He slammed his hand on the desk and yelled at his son that he was tired of him insinuating that he had not done everything in his power to find Whitney. He loves Whitney more than Sam will ever know, and he will never give up on her. Once he's done, Kyle asks if anything will be done about the 2 officers who left at the funeral, the 2 that were accompanied by Clary while he was talking to Mr. DeStaro. At this, Sheriff Walker sighs and says that the reason the 2 officers left was because he had actually called them in to go on an assignment. Now, Sam and Kyle don't believe this and yell at him, but Sheriff Walker's had enough. He says if they want to leave a statement, they could talk to Ramirez and leave one, but he is done being interrogated like this. Now, an interesting thing happens in the text of the story here. See, anytime Sheriff Walker is mentioned, Sam refers to him as dad or my dad. As the story is in first person, it's Sam's point of view. That is his father. That's how he is referred to. But at this point in the story, from now until the end, instead of referring to him as dad or something along those lines, he simply refers to him as the sheriff. This indicates that through all of these events, there has been a shift in the relationship between Sam and the sheriff. The two get up and leave, brushing past Ramirez, refusing to leave a statement, and they go out to the parking lot and get in their car. They sit in a fuming silence for a minute, angry about what just transpired. Sam waits on Kyle to say something when he hears a sniffle from the passenger seat. He looks over and saw Kyle crying. He notes that this was the first time he'd ever seen Kyle cry, but it wouldn't be the last. Kyle says that Sheriff Walker is lying, that what happened to Kimber is what happened to everyone else. They went to the place where bad things happen. Whatever happens at Borrasca, whatever part it has to do with the Prescott's empire or the powder or the triple tree, it happened to Kimber. He says that maybe, without anywhere else to go, they should go to the triple tree. After all, that's where all of this started, for them at least. Maybe there's something there that they can find. Sam reminds Kyle they've been there hundreds of times, that nothing's ever changed there. But Kyle insists he doesn't know where else to go. And then they hear 3 knocks on the window. Sam composes himself and rolls the window down to see one of the 2 officers that was with Clary at the funeral, one of the 2 that had left, and that Sheriff Walker had supposedly sent on an assignment. He basically tells the boys that they better be getting home, to which Sam says they are, and then they drive away. Sam humors Kyle and brings him to the triple tree. Not knowing where else to go, they check it out, but there's nothing new. By this point, night has fallen over the town of Drisking, and the boys trudge back through the woods in the darkness. Though it wasn't said aloud, the whole time that they were out in the woods looking for Kimber or some sign of her at the triple tree, they were afraid that they would hear that metallic sound booming over the mountain from Borrasca. Luckily, though, that night, it didn't come. Sam dropped Kyle off, promising him that they would start searching first thing in the morning for some sign of her, and that all hope was not yet gone. When Sam walked into his own house, he saw the sheriff waiting for him in the kitchen. He wanted to apologize about his outburst earlier in the day, and explained to Sam that Mrs. Testaro had been depressed for some time. Early in her marriage, she had suffered a few miscarriages, and that, on top of other issues, put a heavy burden on her that she was never quite able to get rid of. Because of this, over time, it got worse, until ultimately she ended up taking her own life. Sam isn't listening to this, though. The whole time he is sitting there, wondering if he can truly trust the man he's called his father. But Sam asks if he promises that he'll do everything in his power to at least check out what happened to the Testaros, find where they were and if they're okay. And Sheriff Walker says yes. He promises he'll do whatever he can to find Kimber. Sam nods and heads upstairs to go to bed. When Sam went to the Landys the following morning, he was surprised to be greeted by Parker instead of Kyle. Parker informed him that Kyle had actually left far earlier in the morning and was out in the woods somewhere. Sam thanked Parker and then called Kyle to try and get in touch with him. It took a few calls, but eventually he did, and Kyle was already out in the woods looking for Kimber. The two agreed on a meeting spot by one of the trails, and Sam would arrive and wait for Kyle for about half an hour to come down from the woods. He was covered in sweat and dirt and had clearly been there a while. And so this was their routine for days. From sunrise to sunset, they would look for Kimber, try and find any sort of sign of her, any trace at all. But they never did. 11 nights after Kimber's disappearance, I was awoken by the piercing, whirling, screeching sound of death at Borrasca. I cried myself back to sleep, to the tortured din of Kyle's own agony next door. We had failed her. Kimber was dead. When Sam went to pick Kyle up the next morning, he could tell that his friend was in rough shape. He had a sickly tint to his skin, and his eyes were glossed over. There was no emotion in his voice when he spoke. Sam tried to tell Kyle that all hope wasn't gone, not yet. Mr. Testaro was missing. Maybe the sound of Borrasca was him and not Kimber, but Kyle didn't buy it. He knew in his heart of hearts that Kimber was gone, and that they had failed in finding her. She had become one of the victims of Borrasca, just as so many others had over the years. All the people that disappeared. Whitney, Paige, Hannah, and now Kimber. Going more off instinct than anything, they knew they had to search the woods again. If they couldn't save Kimber, maybe they could avenge her, or at least get some sort of justice for her. Neither of them slept well the night before, so they went to get energy drinks from the gas station to refuel themselves. And it was while there that Sam ran into his boss, Mira. Now, since Kimber's disappearance, Sam had been calling off work pretty well every day to search the woods, and today was going to be no exception. So when he ran into her, he told her that he was going to have to call in today. But Mira didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, Mira was in an uncharacteristically joyful mood. Mira tells Sam it's totally fine. He's welcome to take another day off and go do whatever the boys were doing. But she is curious about what they've been up to for so long that made Sam have to call off work so many days. And as she asks this, Kyle comes up, who makes the situation just so much worse. So when Mira asks what the boys are up to, Kyle tells her very coldly that they are looking for Borrasca. Now, while she does think it's a little strange that two, nearly grown men are searching for a childhood urban legend, one that's been around since she was a kid, she says that she remembers Sam asking Owen about it that day that he came into the shop, and wishes them luck. And so the groups part ways, with Sam and Kyle taking their energy drinks and going back into the car. It is in the car, though, that Kyle asks Sam why he had asked Owen about Borrasca. Sam says he had brought it up whenever they were talking about the missing McCaskey boys, and just wanted to know if Owen knew anything, to which Kyle asked if he did, or if anything interesting was brought up during the conversation. Sam said not really, and proceeded to drink his energy drink, but as he's sitting there, replaying the conversation that he had had with Owen in his head, he realizes that there is one little detail that he had forgotten, one so small that he hadn't even realized it until just this moment. When Owen was talking about it, he referred to it, instead of just Borrasca, as a Borrasca, as though it was a thing and not a place. The boys try looking up what is a Borrasca. They had Googled the term several times, but were never certain if they were spelling it right or anything along those lines, and this time was no different. Nothing came up. But they realized that maybe the answer to finding Borrasca had been in front of them the whole time. They needed to go to the History Center and talk to Mrs. Scanlon, and this is exactly what they decided to do. When they got there, Mrs. Scanlon was actually excited to see the boys again, and asked what she could help them with this time, to which they asked if a Borrasca was a place or a thing, to which she said it was actually both. See, according to her, Borrasca was a term used by miners to describe an underperforming mine, one that had run dry or was unprofitable by this point. Kyle sighs to Sam, saying that they had been searching mines already, that they hadn't found anything, but Mrs. Scanlon mentions that Borrasca doesn't just refer to any underperforming mine. It typically refers to the first one to run dry in a system. Now, Drisking, of course, was a mining town. There were several mines around the area, so they asked her which one was the first one to run dry. She pulls out a map and points to one specific location, saying that this is the first mine to have run dry here in Drisking. They had found it. After all these years, all this time, they now finally had a location for Borrasca. They asked if they could take the mine, to which she said yes, but warned them that if they were going into the mountains, they needed to be careful. Sam lied and said he was taking his father with him, and Mrs. Scanlon said, okay, be careful. When they got back to the car, Kyle looked at the map and realized that the location of Borrasca was so far from where they had been looking, somewhere deep within the mountains in the woods. But now they knew where it was, and if there was any chance that Kimber was alive, any chance at all, no matter how slim it looked right now, they needed to go investigate and see if they could find her and help her. And if it was too late, maybe they could get justice for her and so many others who had went to the place where bad things happen. Their route took them to the West Rim Prescott Ore Trail once again, where Sam parked his car and headed up through the mountains, passing the triple tree and walking for hours in silence as they stayed determined to find Borrasca. The day dragged on as they trudged through the wilderness, until finally, hours after they had started looking, they saw a clearing in the trees. And through this clearing, they could see buildings. They were old, worn down buildings, but they could tell that these were man-made structures. And in front of all the buildings, there was a sign. At one point, the text on the sign had read Drisking Underground Mine. But due to its age, its weathering, and its erosion, all that was left was Skinndmin. Skinned men. There were several buildings around the area, but they decided to check out one that was closest to them. It was an old building that seemed to be about 2 stories high, so they snuck around the back and made their way inside. We counted to 3 and then ran across the camp to the large wooden doors of the old building. They were cracked open, and when we squeezed inside, I had no doubts that death was indeed present at Borrasca. We were standing in what I guessed was a refinery, and in the middle of the room was a large, silver, conically shaped machine. A conveyor belt fed into it, and the room had a sour smell. Even the dirt beneath our feet seemed to have taken on a crimson tint. "This is the machine. This is where they take them," I said. "People die in here." There was no trace of Kimber, though, so Kyle said they had to keep moving and ran out of the building with Sam following close behind. But on their way out and in their hurry, they almost ran into a truck that was parked outside the front door. They recognized this truck immediately as belonging to Jimmy Prescott. They weren't alone. Prescott was here on the mountain with them somewhere, here at Borrasca, so they made sure to up their level of caution and creep around slowly to another building, one about 12 yards in front of them. They moved slowly and quietly, trying not to be seen as they made their way up to the building. The building they were approaching, though, had an open window, and as they got near it, they heard a sound coming from the inside, and they quickly identified it as the sound of people having sex. The boys didn't have time to think about this, though. They found a door to the building away from the window and crept inside. Once again, Kyle took the lead, and Sam followed behind him. I followed him in through the first door we came upon, and was hit in the face by an invisible wall of the stench of great suffering. The smell knocked me back, but Kyle kept running. I followed him in past crates of ramen noodles, MREs, bottled water, and boxes I had no time to read. I crossed another threshold and was suddenly surrounded by people. So many people. I skidded to a halt and realized I was standing in a sort of dorm. Rows and rows of beds on either side of me, with people strapped to them. Some of them wearing dirty rags, and some wearing nothing at all. Many seemed to be bloated, and I waited for one to call out to me, but they all remained silent. Some watching me through tired, dead eyes, and others turning their heads away from me. Looking around, I realized they were all women, and the bloating I saw seemed to be pregnancies. Some were confined to their beds with straps, and others were not. Sam was looking around at all these girls strapped to the beds, but Kyle didn't care. He didn't see Kimber, and he kept moving, searching for her, eyeing down every bed to make sure that she wasn't one of them. They charged through another door and into another room and saw a horrifying sight in front of them. Strapped to one of the beds was Christy, Phoebe Dranger's old friend who had supposedly run away to be with some college guy some time ago. She was inebriated in some way and completely unresponsive, and atop of her was Jimmy Prescott. This was the source of the sound that they had heard through that open window. Prescott heard them walk in and snapped his head quickly over to look at them, only looking surprised for a second. His eyes met theirs, and he began to smile a devilish grin as he continued what he was doing. Once again, Kyle wasted no time. He ran past Prescott, focused on finding Kimber, but Sam sat and watched. He wanted to run up to Prescott, push him off Christy, and beat him for what he was doing to her. But to his utter shame, he couldn't move. He was too in shock to do anything, and he just sat there and watched. But he was snapped out of his trance by the sound of Kyle, so far ahead of him, somewhere deep within Borrasca, screaming that he had found her, that he had found Kimber. She was alive. Sam followed the voice of his friend through the labyrinth-like build of Borrasca, until finally, after traversing rows and rows of beds and rooms, he saw Kyle desperately tugging at the straps, trying to free the woman strapped in the bed. And Sam looked down to see sure enough it was Kimber. He quickly helped Kyle break the straps that had been confining their friend to this bed, but Sam made sure that while he worked to free his friend, he didn't look at her. He knew that in this state, if her eyes met his, he wouldn't be able to take it. He knew that his heart would break at seeing her like this, so he made sure just to stay focused on the straps, undoing them one at a time. But as they were working, they heard the taunting voice of Prescott come up from behind them, his voice echoing off the walls from some distance away, saying that they couldn't hide. He knew exactly why they were here, and he knew exactly where they were. Kyle screamed at Prescott, saying that he would kill him if he comes near them, as he got the last restraint off of Kimber. She was under the influence of whatever drugs they were using to keep the girl sedated, so she couldn't walk on her own, so Kyle and Sam had to get her from either side and help support her as they walked out. They tried to hurry, but the quicker they moved, the more they heard pained moans from Kimber. Sam thought that his heart couldn't break any more than it already had. Yet this place, this hell that was Borrasca, was not yet done with them. As while they were trying to hurry and get Kimber out of there, Sam's eyes met with one of the girls, strapped to one of the beds. and he felt his world come shattering down like he never expected it could. He almost dropped Kimber when he saw her. Kyle noticed and quickly course-corrected, supporting the weight that Sam had let go. There, in one of the beds, was Whitney. Sam stopped dead in his tracks, and Kyle pleaded that they needed to keep moving, that they needed to get Kimber out of here now. But Sam couldn't do it. What all this had been about since Sam was a boy was Whitney. Finding out what had happened to her, and there she was, right in front of him. And he wasn't going to leave her behind. Kyle understood, but said he couldn't stay and help. He had to get Kimber out of this place. And the two nodded in understanding and wished each other luck, as Kyle took Kimber away to safety, and Sam went to help his sister. In the years that had passed since Sam had last seen his sister, she was almost unrecognizable. Her hair was long and thin. Her body was frail and emaciated aside from the bloating in her stomach like so many of the other women had. As Sam went to undo her restraints, she flinched at his touch. He carefully tried to undo all of her straps, careful not to hurt his sister in the process as he undid them. And as he did, he heard Jimmy Prescott walk up behind him. Regardless of Prescott being right behind him, he didn't care. He kept tugging at the straps, trying to free his sister. Jimmy began taunting Sam, telling him that his friends weren't going to make it off this mountain, that he had already sent Clary out to find them. Sam asked why former Sheriff Clary would be involved in all of this, but he didn't actually care. He just needed Prescott to keep talking as opposed to trying to stop him. Prescott said that Clary was actually supposed to be retired from all of this, but that he kept a few horses in the race. Sam asked what he meant by horses, to which Jimmy mockingly said, "This place is referred to as the stables, and the girls that they kept trapped here were the horses." Sam was disgusted by what Jimmy was saying, but he had to keep trying to free Whitney. And as he finally got Whitney's last restraint off, he was ready to fight Prescott so that Whitney could get up and run out of there, but much to his dismay, Whitney didn't get up. With her limbs free, she simply rubbed her wrist, scratched her back, and then laid back down on the bed. See, from what they had done to Whitney for all these years, she wasn't really there anymore. She was heavily sedated like all the others, and the Whitney that Sam had known, his sister who he would always get into arguments with, was gone. Sam realized that it was hopeless. He collapsed down onto the ground next to the bed and held his sister's cold hand as he waited for death to come. If she wasn't going to leave this place, neither was he. Prescott let out a sigh and asked Sam if he knew what this place was, to which Sam said no. Prescott said that Sam should, as one day, all of this could be his. And Jimmy told him that all of this whole sickening operation, was about the babies. You wouldn't believe how much money is in the industry. I mean, my dad was a smart man, and he knew we didn't have anything of value to sell, and back then the Prescotts were dirt poor, out-of-work miners just like everyone else in town. He first got the idea when he sold my older brother off to pay for the legal fees to fight the city. I mean, some people will pay 5 figures for a newborn, even back then. And the organizations that buy them, well, they buy in bulk, but we still make a killing off them. And our overhead is very low, as you can see. Jimmy stood up and pulled a gun out of his waistband, then threw it on the bed across the aisle. Try to understand, Sammy. It's not just about the money. We use the stables for community services, too. Lots of people in the town come to us, ever since the incident in the 50s. Sam couldn't take it anymore. He didn't just want to sit there and wait to die while Prescott told him a story, so he told him such. He said, "If you're going to kill me, just get on with it. I don't care about any of this." But Prescott just laughed and said that he wasn't allowed to kill Sam. So Sam jumped up and got in Prescott's face, screaming that he would do whatever he wants just so long as he lets Whitney go. But in response, Prescott hits Sam so hard in the face that he falls back to the ground in front of Prescott's feet. Prescott said even if he wanted to let Sam take Whitney and get out of here, he couldn't. She had what he referred to as one of their community service babies inside of her, and that child would be due in a week, 2 tops. But after that point, Whitney had an appointment with the shiny gentleman. Sam starts screaming at Prescott, saying he doesn't care about any of this. He doesn't know what it means. He just wants his sister to be free. But the two are interrupted by Prescott's phone ringing. Jimmy looks down and tells Sam he's going to be right back. He just needs to answer his phone, and walks away. Sam was hoping that Jimmy's confidence that he would just sit there and wait on Prescott to get back would pay off, as he leaned up and began whispering to Whitney that they needed to leave, that they were going to kill her if she stayed here, but she didn't move. Sam kept pleading with her that Prescott would be back any minute, but there was no response, no indication that she even heard him or knew he was there. And in the middle of all of this, Sam's attention is taken away by the sound of a truck pulling up outside and the door opening. Through it, walking Killy and Clary, dragging a beaten and bloodied Kyle behind him, tears still streaming down his face. Prescott yells at Clary, asking where the girl had run off to, but Clary says that Kimber had gotten away, and he wasn't going to just sit on the mountain all day playing hide and seek. If they wanted to know where she was, they had to get it out of Kyle. So Prescott takes the gun and tucks it back in his waistband, approaching Kyle, asking where Kimber is. But he doesn't answer. In return, Prescott kicks Kyle so hard in the ribs that Sam is certain he can hear some of them break as Kyle falls to the ground wheezing. Prescott gets close to Kyle again and repeats himself, saying, "Where is Kimber?" But Kyle doesn't answer, and Prescott brings his boot down on Kyle's ankle, causing him to scream out in agony. Sam jumps up to try and help his friend, but Clary is easily able to restrain him, forcing Sam to watch as Prescott beats Kyle over and over again. All the while, Kyle refuses to give up Kimber. He is beaten to a pulp when Prescott finally grabs Kyle by the hair and holds him up, making his eyes meet his own as he asks, one last time, "Where is Kimber?" And in response, Kyle simply swears at Prescott. And with a shrug, Prescott brings his boot down on Kyle's face, slamming it into the concrete, the sound of Kyle's own skull breaking echoing throughout the room. A silence filled the room, only being partially filled by Kyle's wheezing, labored breaths as his body lay motionless on the ground. Prescott sighs as he uses a towel to wipe the blood off his knuckles. Clary drops Sam to the ground and takes a drag from his cigarette, all the while Sam just stares at his friend's body. Moments pass before Clary says that Sam is free to take Kyle and get out of this place. Now Prescott objects to this completely, saying that Kyle isn't going anywhere and neither is Sam. But Clary asks if Prescott really wants to be the one that cleans up the bloodied mess in front of them, as though beating Kyle nearly to death is nothing more than a minor inconvenience like spilling a drink. And Prescott agrees, but Sam says he's not going anywhere, not without Whitney. The two men laugh at Sam and tell him that Kyle isn't dead yet, but he will be soon if Sam doesn't take him now and get him to the hospital. And Sam realized the men were right. If he wanted to save Kyle, his best friend who agreed to go to hell and back with him and was paying the price for it, if he wanted to save him, he would have to leave Whitney, the reason all of this started for him in the first place, behind, to die here at Borrasca. But he knew he really didn't have a choice. He agreed that he would take Kyle and leave this place, and Clary gave him his truck keys and told him there's a back road down the mountain that they could take that would get them to the hospital quickly if they wanted to save Kyle's life. And so that's exactly what Sam did, dragging Kyle's almost lifeless body into the truck and flooring it down the mountain. He drove in a way that almost certainly broke the suspension of the truck, but he didn't care. He just had to get Kyle out of there. And by the time he pulled up to the front door of the hospital, he saw that there was a team already waiting for him with a gurney and an IV for Kyle. Sam sat in the waiting room, crying, waiting to hear of any update from Kyle or to see if anyone would come back to take a statement from him or at least ask what happened. But no one did. So Sam just sat there, waiting in agony to know what happened to his friend. This went on for hours until finally someone entered the room, but it wasn't who Sam was expecting. Kyle's mother, Mrs. Landy, came into the room and began screaming at Sam, but she was followed closely behind by Sheriff Walker and some other policemen. The policemen were able to restrain Mrs. Landy, while Sheriff Walker got his son and brought him out of there, driving him home. In the car ride, Sam asked if anything was going to be done about this, to which Sheriff Walker said he was doing his best to keep the situation under control, but that if the Landys wanted to sue or press charges against Sam, there was nothing he could do to keep his son out of court. Sam asks what he's talking about. He didn't do this. It was Prescott and Clary who had beaten Kyle nearly to death on the mountain where they're keeping these women prisoner. But Sheriff Walker simply says that he had already spoken to Prescott and Clary. He says he's not sure why Sam had decided to beat his best friend nearly to death, and he didn't want to know, but that he was going to do his best to keep his son out of jail or prison or out of court or whatever repercussions were going to come of this. His father was on the side of Prescott and Clary, and Sam knew it. His father was contributing to the cover-up story, backing up Prescott and Clary that it was Sam who had done this to Kyle, and not them. Sam swears at the man he had once called his father and gets out of the car, running away from him and his broken life. Sheriff Walker never went looking for his son that day, nor any day after. The whole town thought Sam was a violent thug who had almost killed Kyle, so he had to stay in a motel room as opposed to sleeping on anyone else's couch. Staying in town just long enough to hear of Kyle's condition, checking the newspaper every day to see if there was any mention of his friend's release from the hospital. While checking the newspaper about 10 days after the events at Borrasca had transpired, Sam saw that Owen and Mira Daly had just had a baby, a son named William. And that night, as Sam tried to sleep, the metallic sound of death from Borrasca filled up the night air, and Sam cried, knowing that after all these years, all her years of torment and agony, Whitney was gone. Sam continued to stay in Drisking even after he ran out of money to pay for the motel room, instead sleeping on benches and on the concrete behind the motel, just waiting until he finally heard word that Kyle was out of the hospital, and when he finally did, he went to the Landy's house to see him. Luckily, Mr. and Mrs. Landy weren't there, but Parker was, and Parker, of course believing that Sam had done this to his brother, refused to let him inside the house. After Sam threatened Parker, Parker let him inside to go see Kyle. There wasn't much left of his friend. Kyle was in a completely unresponsive state. He was unable to move, speak, and from what the doctors said, even think. Kyle was only alive in a medical sense. The Kyle he had known, that fiery, energetic boy, had died on the mountain that night at Borrasca. And realizing that there was nothing left of his friend, Sam left Drisking. He hitchhiked his way to Chicago, and there he admits that he went on a drug-fueled bender for several years, just trying to cope with his broken life. But one day, 4 years after the events of the story, Sam got a letter in the mail. He could tell it was from California, but besides that there was no return address, nor the name of who had sent it. But Sam knew exactly who it was through the handwriting. After all, she had done so many of Sam's assignments throughout high school that he recognized hers better than his own. This letter was from Kimber. He quickly opened up the letter and saw that it wasn't just any letter. It was the letter, the very same that Kimber's mother had left behind for her before she passed, and it read the following. My Kimber, I need to tell you some things before I go. I know you aren't going to understand why we did the things we did. Please understand it was all born out of love. At least it started that way. You're everything to me and you'll always be my daughter, do you understand? And I'm leaving this world because of what I've done to you, not because of what you are. I don't want you to be upset about what you are, because who you are is beautiful. My love, this town has done horrible things, and all of us who live here are guilty. Read this letter and leave this place. I need to tell you all of this. I need to start at the beginning. Somewhere along the way, decades ago, the major population of Drisking became unable to bear children. Most people blame the town for letting the iron ore leak into our water table during the collapsing of our mines. This is the same water table that still provides the town's water today. They were never quite able to fix it, and ore is toxic and exposure causes infertility. The town did, and still does, suffer greatly from its effects. And the Prescotts? They solved the problem that no one could solve. It was an ugly, crass solution, but most people were happy to look away when they were able to raise families again. You see, they took girls, mostly women from other places, and they impregnated them and gave us their babies. And the town came under the care of Thomas Prescott when he started to sell some of the babies on the side for a profit to rich couples. And the sheriff? He helped him do this. But then an ugly rumor started that they were selling to human traffickers, and the Prescott had to offer triple the price for girls. And in town, we began to murmur. But we once again turned the other cheek when the city was suddenly flooded with money because of how well the traffickers paid. People had well-paying jobs again and were proud to call Drisking home. So we said nothing, and those that did were taken to the mountain. Because that is where they do it. There is a place on the mountain where the women are taken, Kimber. Drifters run away, and if their parents choose it, sometimes the girls in town are even sold back. They arrange to sell the girls, and they meet them at a tree halfway between our town and their baby mill. Sometimes kids play there now. I think you played there. The Prescotts and the sheriff are the ones who impregnate the girls, and the children are named after them. P children for the Prescotts, and K children for the sheriff. And when the women become too sick or too old to deliver profitable babies, they are sent through the giant machine that was used to refine ore. They call it the Shiny Gentleman. Their bodies are crushed, and the blood and skin stripped away, and what remains of them are their stolen children and the dust of their bones. And all that's left of their bodies is the powder that they spread over the mountain to hide our crimes. I'm telling you this, Kimber, because you are one of those children. Most of your friends are one of those children. Please get out of Drisking before your father finds this letter. Run away and never come back and never speak of it to anyone. Their industry has deep roots now, and the traffickers have lofty connections. Don't tell anyone. Don't keep this letter. Don't look back. I love you. I'm sorry I have to leave you. We all have to answer for our sins, and I'm ready to burn in hell for mine. Love always and forever, Mom. And that letter brings an end to Borrasca. With the audience now aware of everything that happened, the story is now completely different upon reviewing it. You now take note of why so many characters' names start with P or K, because these are the children of the Prescotts and the Clarys since their parents were unable to have children of their own, and this creates even more sickening revelations when you realize that Kyle and Kimber's names both start with K, and they were dating. And from what we know with the letter, that means they were actually, unknown to them, siblings. However, worse than that is William is a product of Borrasca. Remember, William is Mira and Owen Daly's kid, who is actually Whitney's kid, as we know from what Sam said. And because he's Whitney's kid, he's a product of Borrasca. But his name doesn't start with a P or a K. It starts with a W. And you know who else's last name starts with a W? Sheriff Walker. And the letter says that the sheriffs always help the Prescotts in this, which means William is actually the son of Whitney and Sheriff Walker, which means Sheriff Walker and his daughter. Yeah. Odds are I've called this video something like the scariest short story I've ever read. That's probably exactly what it's going to be titled, honestly. And I think that is the case, not because it's scary and like, ooh, monsters and stuff, but because of the sickening lengths that mankind goes in this story. Obviously, through their baby mill at Borrasca, it doesn't leave you feeling good once you're done reading it. Yeah, it's scary in a different sense, is what I'm trying to say. Not so much like, ooh, boogeyman, but like, this is really messed up. But the world of Borrasca actually continues in two different ways as far as I know. One is the sequel, Borrasca V. The V's like Roman numeral 5. I'm calling it Borrasca V, though. It takes place about 10 years after the initial story, and it's very good, too. I enjoy it. It gives a lot of closure to the story, but it's so tonally different because it's not scary, or it's not a horror story, at least. Like, this story, although at the end it's revealed like there is no like skinned man and the Shiny Gentleman isn't like some entity, it's a freaking mining ore refinery that they used to, yeah. But it is still built as a horror story this time. You're wondering if there are these monsters in the mountains, even though as the story progresses it looks less and less so. That is still something that is always aware that this could end with a monster. By the time the sequel comes, though, they're aware that there is no monster. They're aware that this is the Prescotts and the sheriffs that are running this, baby mill thing. So the story doesn't build off like, oh, like what's up there? What's in the mountain? There's not that mystery to it. I'm saying this like it's a bad thing. It's still a very good story. It's just very tonally different from the initial Borrasca. I definitely recommend checking it out. I'll probably make a video on it sometime. There's also an audio drama version of Borrasca, which stars Cole Sprouse of like Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and Riverdale fame. It's not bad either. It makes a good bit of changes from the book. Some I like, some I'm not crazy about, but overall it's a pretty good remake and interpretation of Borrasca. I'd recommend it too. But yeah, This story is really good. I'd recommend checking it out for yourself, like reading the story, because as I said earlier, some idiot explained it on the internet's not the same. It's completely different a second time around when you're aware of the twist and so much just seems so obvious to you upon reading it or viewing it again. It's kind of fun to go back and find all those little details that were hidden the first time around. But that is pretty well going to do it for today. I've been rambling for a very long time now. I don't know if any of the last few things I've said made sense. They made sense to me, but I've been at this a while now. So I definitely hoped you all enjoyed watching, and I thank you for sticking around because I know this one was a little bit longer. I especially appreciate you for watching because there was like no media to see on this besides me rambling and maybe like some text here and there. So thank you for watching if that's the case. There just isn't a lot of art to go along with this story. And I think some of it's copyrighted. I might be wrong, but I'm not looking to find out the hard way. Yeah, so thanks for listening if that's why you did it. If you watched, you're a madman, and I appreciate it nonetheless. Yeah, I'm going to try and get this out pretty quick for you guys because I've got another video I want to do for October. Probably it'll come out around or on Halloween, kind of a Halloween special, if you will. And then I've also got a collaboration I'm doing with a YouTuber on their channel. I don't want to say who because I don't know if I'm allowed to. I will definitely post about it like on the community tab and on social medias, which you can find here. I don't use them much, so you're not missing out if you don't follow them. I wouldn't even recommend following them, but if you want to, you can. But yeah, super excited about that. So got this video coming out, one actually for Halloween, and then a collaboration. So I'm super excited about all of that. It should be a lot of fun to work on all these things, and I'm really excited about all of them. One last thing before I go, because I know I've been rambling forever. The channel just hit 35,000 subscribers, and I'm confident that returning viewers are sick of me saying this because it's like every video. But guys, that is unreal. Legitimate. Like I can't thank you guys enough for that. 35,000 is an insane number. I didn't think I'd make it to 1,000 ever, and here we are at 35,000, and that is so wild, and I just appreciate it so much. As people have seen from the upload schedule recently, life's been somewhat of a roller coaster, you know, some good, some bad, but it's starting to slow down, and I don't want to jinx myself here, but things are starting to look up, you know, knock on wood. Yeah, but I can confidently say through all the ups and downs, especially as of late these last few months, doing this YouTube, you know, the Jaybird channel, has been one of the things that's kept me upbeat and going and positive, and that is all because of you guys and your support and just you guys watching. And I seriously can't thank you enough. It's easily become one of my favorite parts of life, and I don't take it for granted. So thank you. But that's enough of being sappy. It is the creepy month, so we are here to, you know, get creeped out and have fun watching horror movies and hearing horror stories and whatnot. So I will let you all go get back to that. I'm sure I've said it a ton by now, but thank you guys for watching. I'm going to go edit this because I know it's long. And I hope you all have a great day.